Hey, I hope you guys are doing good today. We are on to part 4 of the JonBenet Ramsey case, and this one is called A House Divided. So I'm very, very curious to know what is going to go on in this one. If you do get a chance, I'd appreciate if you can leave a like and subscribe. It helps me out a bunch. And I will have the Laura Lodge's video linked in my description below, so be sure to give him a like and subscribe because he's done such a fantastic job with this series. I really appreciate this so much. All right, let's get into it.
But if I were a resident of Boulder, I will tell my friends to keep your babies close to you. There's someone out there.
On January 1st, 1997, Boulder...
I forgot. We're going to Georgia.
Police detectives Steve Thomas, Ron Gosage, Tom Trujillo, Jane Harmer, and their Sergeant Larry Mason were on their way to Atlanta. It had been 7 days since JonBenet Ramsey was found deceased in the basement of a sprawling, labyrinthian home in one of the city's nicer neighborhoods, and the police had very little to go on even after a full week of ceaseless investigation. Though they were firing on all cylinders, interviewing neighbors, friends, employees, and even at this point potential suspects, one very big question loomed over the whole case. Who were John and Patsy Ramsey, and what did they actually know about the night in question? Despite
I'm actually really looking forward to this episode, mainly because I never did a really deep dive into this case. I kind of just have seen things in passing, so I feel like this is going to be a really important episode of us being able to kind of get a good look at this.
Multiple attempts to secure an interview with the grieving parents, something always came up to prevent that step from being taken. First, the Ramseys were too shaken up, then Patsy was too medicated, and not long after that, they left town to bury JonBenet in the same plot as her older sister. And for that reason, it came as something of a surprise when John and Patsy appeared on CNN that New Year's Day. At 4:34 p.m., anchor Natalie Allen welcomed correspondent Brian Cabell onto the program, informing audiences that earlier that day, he'd conducted an extensive interview with the child's parents. And before getting into the interview footage, Cabell explained that the Ramseys had told him that they were going to be putting together their own investigative team, something that was not meant as any disrespect for the Colorado authorities.
Does this seem weird that you would go on to television and have this in-depth interview, but you weren't willing to have an interview with law enforcement? Because I feel like that seems a little bit weird to me.
Investigative team, something that was not meant as any disrespect for the Colorado authorities. They simply wanted the best mind possible looking into the crime. And they'd also told the reporter that they were considering offering a $50,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of JonBenet's killer starting the following week. That, and the note that they'd spoken for about 45 minutes, the tape of that interview rolled. Brian began by asking the parents why they'd chosen to speak to the media now, to which John responded by explaining that we have been pretty isolated, totally isolated, for the last 5 days, but that they sense from their friends that this tragedy...
But they did this, they wanted it. They wanted to be self-isolated. They didn't want to talk to anybody. So I don't know. I don't know if we can say that and have the right context with it.
Isolated for the last 5 days, but that they sense from their friends that this tragedy has touched not just ourselves and our friends, but many people. He then explained that for our grief to resolve itself, we now have to find out why this happened. Cabell then pointed out that there has been some question as to why you hired a defense attorney, and John replied by contradicting his previous statement. I know, he said. Well, we were fortunate from almost the moment that we found the note to be surrounded by friends, our minister, that was Father Holverstock, our family doctor, Dr. Boaf, and a personal friend of mine who is also an attorney, Mike Bynum. And we relied on their guidance almost from that moment on, and my friend suggested that it would be foolish not to have knowledgeable counsel to help both us and with the investigation. Now, it may seem weak to call that a contradiction, but the fact is that John and Patsy Ramsey were surrounded by friends and family since the literal moment that JonBenet was reported missing.
Right, right. And that's what makes it a little bit off.
Patsy called Fleet and Priscilla White, as well as John and Barbara Fernie, as soon as she'd finished her 911 call at 5:52 a.m. on December 26, 1996. Both couples arrived within the half hour, and the Ramseys spent that night with the Fernies. John, Andrew, and Melinda Ramsey were in town by the early afternoon, and Patsy's sisters weren't far behind. And all of these family members were present in Boulder until the Ramseys left for Atlanta on the 29th, and they, along with the Whites and the Fernies, traveled to Georgia for the funeral. As far as the CNN interview was concerned, however, Patsy had not remained silent either, despite being under the influence of sedatives. In response to the first question, she'd expressed that they had been overwhelmed by the cards and letters and visits and people we haven't seen for years who have come to call and be supportive. A statement which, despite being delivered immediately after John said they were isolated, clearly showed that they had not been alone during this time of grief.
Right. I mean, oof, yeah, this is already shaping up to be a hot mess, isn't it?
John's response to the lawyer issue, she asked that if anyone knows anything, please help us. For the safety of all the children, we have to find out who did this. Not because we're angry, John interjected, but because we have got to go on. And as the detectives watched the interview unfold, they were puzzled by that moment. How could they not be angry, and how could they just want to get on with their lives? It was also odd that Patsy was telling people that the killer needed to be found for the safety of all children, considering the ransom note had specified John as the target, and that this was based on his business associations with the US government. If the note were legitimate, then there was no reason for anyone not named Ramsey to be concerned.
Also true. Although, as wealthy as these two are, and I'm not trying to be mean here, or it's going to sound mean, but Patsy does not seem like she is the brightest crayon in the box. You know what I mean? And definitely seems like both of them seem to be very, very tone deaf in a lot of these situations. And I don't know what that is. I don't know if it's like a guilt thing. I don't know if they really are like this. I really honestly have no idea what I think about that, other than that their behaviors and some of their comments and stuff is very, very strange.
If the note were legitimate, then there was no reason for anyone not named Ramsey to be concerned. Cabell didn't press that issue, but instead followed up with a gentle probe of a question, asking the couple if they were fully convinced that their daughter was kidnapped by some outsiders outside the family or the circle of close friends. John initially said yes, but then backtracked, saying, we don't, it's just so hard to know, but our family is a loving family. It's a gentle family. We have lost one child. We know how precious their lives are. Cabell neglected to follow up on that stumbling non-answer, however, instead moving on to the ransom note. Mrs. Ramsey, he began, you found the note. Was it a handwritten note? 3 pages? The simple answer would have been yes, but that's not what Patsy said. First explaining that she couldn't read the whole thing, she went on to talk about the morning as a whole. I had just gotten up, she said. We were it was the day after Christmas, and we were going to go visiting. And it was quite early in the morning, and I had got dressed and was on my way to the kitchen to make some coffee. And we have a back staircase from the bedroom areas, and I always come down that staircase. And I always come down that staircase. I don't think she's necessarily like self-reporting, but it definitely makes everything else seem a little bit odd, and then she does add that tidbit of like, I always go down that staircase. It makes everything just look odd. Staircase from the bedroom areas, and I always come down that staircase. And I am usually the first one down. And the note was lying across the 3 pages across the run of the stair treads, and it was kind of dimly lit. It was just very early in the morning, and I started to read it, and it was addressed to John. It said, Mr. Ramsey, and it said, we have your daughter. And I just wasn't registering.
Oh, God.
And I may have gotten through another sentence. We have your daughter.
Oh God, so she was just stumbling and kind of mumbo jumbling her way around an answer here. Oof.
And I don't know if I got any further than that. I immediately ran back upstairs and pushed open her door, and she was not in her bed, and I screamed for John. Once again, that didn't really line up with what the police knew to be true. On December 26th, Detective Patterson had interviewed Burke Ramsey, the 9-year-old son of John and Patsy, for about 40 minutes. And during that conversation, while Burke was explaining what he and the family had done on Christmas morning, he said, "We went down the wooden stairs. Clearly the staircase at the front of the house, which led directly from the first floor to John and Patsy's third-floor bedroom." Now, the detective seized on that and gently asked Burke, "Which way do you normally go up and down?" Or your parents, "Which way do they normally go up and down the stairs?" And Burke told Patterson that he wasn't sure because he was at school during the day. So Patterson reframed the question and asked Burke which stairs they used when he was home. To which Burke responded, "Well, I'd say the wooden stairs that we went down for Christmas morning." Pressing further, Patterson asked, "Who uses the circular staircase by the laundry room?" And according to Burke, it was usually just him and his friends because that was the quickest way up to the playroom. And
Well, so what? I mean, who knew staircases could cause so many problems as far as testimonies go, and when they're interviewing Burke? This is very interesting. I will say this is very, very interesting because I wonder what's going to happen when we circle back around to the parents.
it was usually just him and his friends because that was the quickest way up to the playroom. And finally, the detective brought it back around, asking, "Do your parents use those stairs often?" According to Burke, he had never seen John or Patsy use them. Now, Brian...
He has never seen them what? So then why? Okay, so then now I guess now we're still back to the same theory of like, why was the note left there? Of all places at the bottom of the staircase that I guess now Patsy doesn't even use. Oh my God, I had no idea about this part. This is wild. I feel like we are in it now. We are just in it now.
Brian Cabell couldn't possibly have known about that contradiction, or that Patsy had initially told police that she checked on JonBenet first and found the note second. So he just moved along with the chronology. "John," he began, "you subsequently read the note. Was there anything in there that struck you in any sense?" John replied that there wasn't, and that he'd read the note very quickly. "It said don't call police, you know, that type of thing," he continued, "and I told Patsy to call the police immediately." Now, what he didn't tell Cabell, but what the police knew, was that the note said a lot more than that. You see, after explaining how much money John was to withdraw and in what denominations to withdraw it, the supposed kidnapper had explicitly stated that any deviation of my instructions will result in the immediate execution of your daughter, and that the Ramseys would also be denied her remains for proper burial. Then, in no uncertain terms, the representative of the small foreign faction, which supposedly respected his business but not the country that it serves, went on to outline what would happen if John went to the police, or anyone else for that matter.
I do wonder, though, as far as John Ramsey's response to the interviewer. I mean, I'm not saying, like, he is making a very good point about saying that, yes, there's way more to the note than what he told the interviewer. But at the same time, I just wonder if, like, maybe he thought if he had shared more of the ransom note, maybe be oversharing. Maybe he didn't feel comfortable with that. I'm not trying to throw him a bone. I'm just saying, from a different perspective, sometimes when you are on these shows, maybe you don't necessarily share every tidbit, but you just kind of say like the gist of it and maybe don't go too in depth. But I also wonder if he also said it because he knew like that would be just enough that it wouldn't necessarily get him in trouble either, like if law enforcement were to see his interview, which I'm assuming maybe they did.
On to outline what would happen if John went to the police, or anyone else for that matter. Yeah. If John went to the police or the FBI, JonBenet would be beheaded. If we catch you talking to a stray dog, she dies, they continued. If you alert bank authorities, she dies. If the money is in any way marked or tampered with, she dies.
I could also see, though, like if he included these statements, and then you're probably going to ask, he's probably, you know, maybe the interviewer's going to ask the next question, right? Is, well, why did you call the police, right? Which, you know, I think his answer, you know, as vague and like not totally correct as it was, at the same time, probably did save him from answering some other harder questions.
So, despite all of that, John's plan of action was to use the phone, which was by far the easiest to wiretap, to call the police phone number that is the easiest to monitor. That was an odd decision because
Right.
John could have used his cell phone to call someone else and then have them call the authorities.
See, that's what I said in like in the first video, was that, like, you know, like if you really took this seriously, if it was true, why wouldn't you? And the fact that I didn't know he had a cell phone. So like the fact, so yeah, like why wouldn't you use your cell phone and like try to contact somebody outside of there to help bring people in? That would have made more sense. That definitely would have made more sense.
Because John could have used his cell phone to call someone else and then have them call the
Yeah.
authorities. But instead, he had his wife use the landline. And while one can understand that decision, because in a panicked moment, the Ramseys might have thought that they had no other option, what didn't make sense was that they then decided to call two sets of family friends, despite the note saying that her child would be beheaded if she spoke to so much as a stray dog. But
Yeah, so I would say that, like, if this was me, I would not be doing this. I wouldn't be contacting anybody outside. I mean, other than somebody that like maybe I really, really trusted, and I'd find a backdoor way, you know, to try to get help. But I definitely would not be calling two sets of friends. I wouldn't be calling, you know, like if I had a landline, I wouldn't be using the landline to call the police. It definitely seems dumb. I mean, it seems stupid, like that you know, if you took this ransom note for what it was and you took it seriously, like everything that they did afterwards, it seems really stupid.
despite the note saying that her child would be beheaded if she spoke to so much as a stray dog. But for an audience who wasn't aware of the details of the note, the decision to call the police made total sense. To the officers investigating the case, however, these decisions seemed very peculiar.
Yeah.
But Brian Cabell didn't know that any of that was in the note, so he
Right.
let John and Patsy keep talking. Patsy said that they went to check on Burke, and John added that JonBenet sometimes slept in his room. Cabell quickly moved the discussion along to later in the day, likely unaware of the details of the time frame between the 911 call and the discovery of the body.
I'm sure. I mean, I think there's only so much this interviewer's gonna know, right? And oddly enough, you know, like maybe he kind of uncovered more than he meant to, or like intentionally did, or I mean like unintentionally did, because he doesn't know, like he doesn't know the details that probably weren't released or anything like that, especially like at this point in time. So I'm guessing any information that he does know is just like what he got from the news, and there's plenty that, you know, like obviously the general public didn't know at this point in time. So it almost seems better that he did it this way, because he didn't know. I mean, obviously, like you kind of wish that we had like some better follow-up questions, because we can see the contradictions, but at the same time, it is kind of interesting that because he doesn't know, he just kind of lets him talk, you know, and doesn't, you know, he you know, as far as he knows, you know, everything that they're saying is 100% true.
Reporter then asked how it came to be that John went looking for his daughter in the basement, and John responded that they'd waited until after the time the call was supposed to have been made, at which point one of the detectives asked me and my friend who was there to go through every inch of the house to see if there was anything unusual or abnormal that looked out of place. Cabell didn't pick up on the line about a friend being there,
Yeah.
nor did he press John about why non-family members were inside of an active crime scene. Instead,
Right.
he allowed John to describe how they started in the basement, and while they were looking, John opened a door. There were no windows in that room, he said, and I turned the light on and he paused. That was her. Patsy then began to speak, saying she was, only for CNN to cut the tape so that they could go to commercial. Before they went to the
Oh my
advertisers,
God.
however, Brian Cabell explained to the anchors that Mr. Ramsey did confirm that duct tape was found on his daughter's mouth. I asked him about a cord found around her neck. That was a report out of Colorado today. He said he didn't see it. It could have been there, but he was panicked at that point. He picked up the body, ran screaming upstairs, hoping she was still alive, and of course she was not. Then, prepping the audience for what else was about to come, he said that they would address the question of their being suspects themselves. And because CNN thought that this was an appropriate time to cut to commercial, we're just going to do the same thing.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
And also,
what a crap way to go to a commercial, though. Like, can you imagine watching this interview with them and like, let's say that like you were following the story. I feel like this is like a national headline here. I feel like everybody everywhere knew about this, and so can you imagine being like kind of invested in the fact that like you finally get to see them on air in an interview, and like that's where they cut the commercial? Like that's so dirty. It's dirty.
I will address the fact that in this episode, you may have noticed, as compared to the previous three, I've been a little bit more direct in pointing out the inconsistencies regarding things that the Ramsey
As you
said.
should.
And in my opinion, this interview stinks. Like, it smells bad. It smells rotten, like something's wrong. And you know what else stinks? Frankly, a lot of us. You, Aiden, me, we've all smelled bad at some point in our lives. And that's why we decided to tell you about today's sponsor, Mando. Now, I don't know about you guys, but over the years, I've tried a number of deodorants. Unfortunately, I came of age during the time period when a certain brand was everywhere, and we were mostly using it to create, like, spray bombs that we threw into each other's bathrooms. But since becoming an adult, it's been kind of a struggle at times. Not everything works right, and sometimes you find a scent that you really love, but it doesn't last, and you end up just smelling all over again. And I gotta say, for me, that's been the biggest problem, finding a deodorant that I put on, and it still is working 6 hours later. But with Mando, I don't really have to worry about that because it's got a 72-hour odor control. And when I say it's got odor control, I mean that Mando is clinically proven to control odor better than a shower with soap alone. And another great thing is that Mando is actually a high-performance whole-body deodorant that you can apply everywhere. Your pits, the bottom of your feet, other sensitive...
I'm not gonna lie, if he made commercials like for television or like any other like streaming platform, I feel like he should do these commercials. I feel like he should do commercial. Because this is great. This is great. You know what, my deodorant works fine. I'm not a super stinky person, but guess what? I kind of want this now. See?
areas that might smell bad. And that long-lasting whole-body odor control comes in 4 different scents that are all unique from one another. My personal favorite being the bourbon leather, but there's also Clover Woods, Mount Fuji, and Pro Sport. And if you prefer to just be odorless, then there is an unscented version. And if you're wondering how a deodorant can offer all of that while also being skin-safe, baking soda-free, cruelty-free, vegan, pH-optimized to use anywhere on your body, and paraben-free, it's because Mando was created by a doctor who saw firsthand how normal BO was being misdiagnosed and mistreated. Now, what does that mean? It means that Mando, unlike certain traditional deodorants, which try to mask odor with a fragrance and often have aluminum, which Mando does not, Mando is formulated and powered by mandelic acid to stop odor before it starts. So
it's actually kind of cool. I mean, okay, if they had like a sweet vanilla scent or something like that, I don't know. Some of these scents smell a little too bro-ish for me.
it's more like a pre-deodorant. It reduces odor all day and continues controlling BO for 72 hours. Also, they have wipes. Like, just if you really quickly need to hit that, like, you know, you're in the bathroom, you don't have your stick on you, you can keep these guys. Just keep them in your pocket, in your girlfriend's purse, your purse. And aside from the wipes, it's really nice that you get all these different options. I got wipes, I've got a spray, I've got actual stick deodorant. This is my primary one that I use. This is an acidified body wash that's actually, you know, for the shower. So you can kind of use this in tandem with your regular body wash, and then it'll help control odor even better. And there's also just a deodorant cream, which for certain things is a little bit easier than a stick or a spray. So if you'd like to start treating your body odor in a way that's meant to actually eliminate it rather than mask it, Mando's Starter Pack Bundle is a great deal for new customers. It comes with a full-size stick of deodorant, a cream deodorant tube, a spray deodorant, and then these other 2 free guys, which are the wipes and the mini body wash. Or there's other stuff you might get, but these are what I got. You'll also get free US shipping, and just for our subscribers, Mando is offering an extra $5 off when you click the link in the description below and enter code LORELodge at checkout. So that's a deal of over 40% off. If you'd like to get all those deals, you can use the link in our description or the pinned comment, or you can also find Mando at stores like Target and Walmart. Now, of course, I gotta say, Mando is awesome, but not even Mando is strong enough for the stink coming off of this interview.
I feel like he got the most appropriate sponsor ad for this video.
When they returned from the commercial break, CNN anchor Lou Walters welcomed viewers back before co-anchor Natalie Allen threw everything back to Cabell. Cabell then explained that in cases like this, it's very normal police procedure to look at the family first of all as possible suspects in this case.
Right.
And that the Ramseys say they understand this and were well aware of the Susan Smith case a couple of years ago. The reference case involved a woman who reported her 1- and 3-year-old sons missing at the end of October 1994, telling police that a black man had carjacked her and kidnapped her children. She confessed 9 days after making the report, admitting that she had actually rolled her car into a lake with the boys trapped inside. But that's another story for another time, because after he explained this, the taped interview began to play once more, though not from where it had left off. After pointing out that the parents had been asked to supply hair and writing samples, Cabell asked John and a still very sedated Patsy if anyone else was asked. John answered,
I can't believe that they let this happen. I mean, honestly, like with her being sedated, it's just, I don't know, it seems like a recipe for disaster. Clearly it was. I mean, I feel like we're not even that far into this interview, and it is a dumpster fire.
John and a still very sedated Patsy if anyone else was asked. John answered, well, Patsy and I, Burke, our son who is 9, every family member. To which Cabell replied, including your 2 elder children? John confirmed that, but said that he didn't know if any friends had been asked. The parents were then asked if they'd given the samples, and Cabell was somewhat surprised when they said yes, because, according to him, the word was that they thought you were too grief-stricken. So both of you gave samples. After John once again gave an affirmative answer, Cabell asked if they were offended by the request, with John saying no. From there, Cabell moved the conversation to the topic of the killer, prompting the Ramseys to clarify whether or not they believed it was someone outside of their home. Patsy immediately answered, there is a killer on the loose, and John followed with absolutely. Patsy then continued, telling Cabell, I don't know who it is, I don't know if it's a he or a she, but if I were a resident of Boulder, I would tell my friends to keep your babies close to you. There's someone out there. And Cabell responded by pointing out that an FBI spokesman was quoted as saying they don't necessarily regard it as a kidnapping, and asking if the Ramseys felt that that was a wrong assumption. John told the reporter that he didn't know for sure, but there is a note that said, your daughter has been kidnapped, we have your daughter, we want money, you give us the money, she'll be safely returned. And Patsy assented, saying that it seemed like a kidnapping to her, and John followed with, I guess that's what concerns me, because if we don't have the full resources of all the law enforcement community on this case, I'm going to be very upset. Now,
well, I mean, you can, but you're not going to have anybody good because all the good people left. So I guess, I mean, I think we're past that now because of how contaminated the crime scene ended up being.
The full resources of all the law enforcement community on this case, I'm going to be very upset. Now, these statements raised investigative eyebrows as well. The public didn't know it, but as the Ramseys sat in front of CNN, their lawyers were blocking the Boulder Police and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation from testing evidence.
Yep.
And not only that, but the DA's office was helping them to do it, even though FBI agent Ron Walker, who was on the scene the day of the murder, had told police directly that they should consider the parents as suspects. Now, to Cabell's credit, there is no way he could possibly have known about that.
This is true. I mean, I guess I don't know. I mean, obviously I didn't watch this interview when it was live, but I wonder if a lot of people gave him some pushback with his interview, or maybe some criticism. But sometimes criticism isn't fair if you don't have the whole story. And maybe I would assume that your locals in Boulder probably had a little bit more information, probably not that much more than the rest of the country. But I think that there's way more in this that this guy had absolutely no idea about. So, I mean, this is he's doing his interview to the best of his ability, and he's trying to, he might even assume that the Ramseys already had interviewed with law enforcement. He may not even know that any of this, any of that stuff prior to his interview had, what was even going on.
as suspects. Now, to Cabell's credit, there is no way he could possibly have known about that.
Yeah.
Now, the other issue is that the ransom note they just used as evidence that JonBenet was the victim of a botched kidnapping, that the FBI was wrong to say that it wasn't that kind of crime, specified John Ramsey as a target for the sole reason that his business served the US government. So if that was the case, then why did anyone not named John Ramsey, or at least anyone who didn't work for Access Graphics, need to be concerned? The Ramseys were simultaneously arguing that they'd been the victims of a politically motivated terrorist attack by a small foreign faction, and that the perpetrator was some random crazed killer roaming the streets of Boulder. Either the note was legitimate and it was a kidnapping, or it wasn't, and this was just a homicide. But unfortunately, Cabell did not press them on the contradiction. Instead, he remarked that, inevitably, speculation on talk shows will focus on you. It's gotta be sickening. At which point John interjected that it's nauseating beyond belief. And Patsy then expressed how America has just been hurt so deeply with the tragic things that have happened, mentioning the young woman who drove her children into the water, and how we don't know what happened with O.J. Simpson. In her
Huh? What? No. Oh boy. uh, oh, man, just when I thought she couldn't say anything else, that would have been weird. Okay. All right.
water, and how we don't know what happened with O.J. Simpson. In her words, America is suffering because we have lost faith in the American family. And Patsy then appealed to faith, emphasizing that they were a Christian, God-fearing family who loved their children and would do anything for them. But were they? Just before Christmas, the Ramsey family's housekeeper, Linda Hoffman Pugh, had requested a $2,000 loan to cover some necessities. The Ramseys, who were worth $6 million, agreed, but only on the condition that the loan be paid back in $200 increments due each week. A truly Christian family, and especially one worth $6 million, should have been aware of biblical passages like Luke 12:13 through 21, or verses like Mark 10:25. Both
It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of God. Okay, I see what he's saying here. I mean, like, I don't know these Bible verses, so I have to like skim through it real quick. But I understand the context now. But yeah, if they were like truly Christian people, like I guess they would have just given her the 2,000, right?
12:13 through 21, or verses like Mark 10:25. Both,
especially because it doesn't sound like this woman. She didn't sound like somebody who like this is like normal for her, right? Like it didn't sound like this was a normal behavior of hers, like asking for, you know, however much money, you know, outside of what she was already getting paid. I can't talk. But yeah, I mean, I guess that they're if I was worth that much money and I had a loyal person, like housekeeper of some sorts working for me, and something came up with her and she was like, oh, I really need $2,000 to cover, you know, these kind of like, you know, out of left field type of things. I think I would have just, if I was worth that much money, regardless, and that was somebody that was a good employee of mine, I probably would have just given it to him and wouldn't have been like, you know, here, you know, like, don't worry about it. Don't make a habit out of it, but you know.
Both of which encourage charity and almsgiving of those with excess wealth, especially towards those in their community who need it. A truly Christian family worth $6 million would therefore have given their low-income housekeeper a holiday bonus to cover rent, car repairs, and dental work. But instead, Patsy agreed to a loan with an aggressive 10% per week repayment rate. In the book JonBenet, Inside the Ramsey Investigation by Detective Steve Thomas, the author points out that in detective work, it was always a red flag when someone proclaimed innocence by repeated religious affirmations. It's an even bigger red flag when their actions don't match those affirmations. But
very true. Very true. I think that is a very good observation to make.
Brian Cabell didn't know about any of that,
right?
So he didn't press. And with that, the aired portion of the interview came to its last point as Cabell...
I know, like, in hindsight, when we look at this interview, I can, like, feel his, like, but unfortunately, I think, like looking back and the things that we know now, yes, this interview was horrendous. It was terrible. Like, this was bad. This was not good. But at the same time, you can't blame this guy too much. I mean, like, sure, there was like some smaller contradictions that maybe he could have pressed on, but who knows what was going through his mind at this point in time. And as far as the other stuff, like obviously he would have absolutely no idea. So we can't fault him in those parts as much as we would love to know kind of, like the answers to those questions, to like, the ones that don't really make any sense. As much as we would love that, we can't really hold that against him for this, as much as we all kind of already feel frustrated enough.
So he didn't press. And with that, the aired portion of the interview came to its last point as Cabell asked, "Do you truly think the perpetrator will be found?" John said yes, and after further prompting expressed that in his heart, he felt that it was a single individual, even though the ransom note he was leaning on to discredit the FBI's opinion said that it was a group. And the last thing that Patsy did in the interview was say that JonBenet would never have to know the loss of a child, that she would never have to know cancer or the death of a child. And after that, the feed cut back to the...
That is a very weird quote, like last statement there. That is, I mean, she's not wrong, but that's not... that seems weird to me. That seems weird.
That she would never have to know cancer or the death of a child. And after that, the feed cut back to the studio, where Brian Cabell told the anchors that the Ramseys said when they go back, they will sit down with the Boulder police and tell them everything they want to know. That...
Interesting. Will they really? Will they really?
Came as good news to us, writes Detective Thomas,
yeah,
because we were on the way to Atlanta, where they were sitting in a television studio. Maybe we were reading them all wrong. It sounded as if all we had to do in Georgia was knock on their door and get those interviews. After all, the Ramseys had been informed that the detectives were on their way to Atlanta, as had the Atlanta Police Department. So if the Ramseys were sincere, the conversation wouldn't have to wait. But by the time the Boulder investigators arrived, the Ramseys were on a plane, headed for points unknown.
Of course they were. Of course they were. Oh my God. This is so... I feel like this just makes this makes them look terrible. It makes them look bad. Very guilty.
Though the Ramseys were certainly being viewed with a healthy, FBI-endorsed degree of skepticism, the investigators weren't necessarily in Atlanta to build a case against the couple. Boulder's detectives were there for two primary reasons. One was to learn who John and Patsy were as people, and the other to hunt for a name from the past, someone with a grudge, perhaps an enemy capable of negotiating that big confusing house in Boulder and killing JonBenet. Unable to secure an interview with the elusive parents, the police were attempting to build a historical file the hard way, through talking to their friends and family members, and shortly after John and Patsy Ramsey spoke with CNN on New Year's Day 1997, their friends John and Barbara Fernie were sitting with Boulder police detectives for an interview of their own. The couple were, like the Whites, two of the first people to be called to the Ramsey home on that tragic December morning. According to investigator James Kohler in Foreign Faction, the Fernies arrived by the way of the back alley and had approached the rear kitchen door, and from there proceeded around to the front of the house where they joined the company of two uniformed officers and the Whites at the street side entrance to the home. They were then directed inside to the sunroom, where later that morning he and others were shown a copy of the ransom note and asked their thoughts about its contents. Fernie told detectives that he thought the note was very personal and written in a condescending manner towards John Ramsey, but something about it seemed off. In his opinion, the note just didn't really make any sense and seemed to contain some kind of fakey stuff. Beyond that, the couple shared several observations about the morning. John Fernie recalled that someone, probably John Ramsey, said that he had checked all of the doors to the home the previous evening and that all of them were not just securely locked, but deadbolted. And police reports from that morning confirmed that John Ramsey had in fact said this. He'd also checked the doors that morning, finding that all of them remained locked. And this interested Fernie because at one point during the morning, he felt a draft coming in from somewhere in the house. He made a sweep and ascertained that the door on the north side of the house by the butler pantry was standing open, and he then shut it. That was a possible contradiction with what John Ramsey had said, but on the other hand, according to Officer Rick French's police report, the responding officer himself personally checked all doors to the home, finding them closed and securely locked, which is something that he and John Ramsey agreed upon on that day. So, the door that Fernie had found open must have been opened after the police arrived. But
Right. Okay. So then, like, I mean, obviously he probably is just saying, trying to think of everything he can think of, whether or not like that it matches the right timelines.
Barb Fernie shared a concern of her own. According to Kohler, she told investigators that Patsy Ramsey had told her on the morning of December 26th that she had just given the ransom note to John after finding it on the spiral staircase. Now, that entire morning, up until John went to get Burke and sent him off to the White's house, Barb Fernie had been confused regarding that boy's whereabouts. She understood that Burke typically woke up around 5:30, and yet he was nowhere to be seen over an hour later, and with quite a commotion going on downstairs. That morning, the Ramseys told everyone, including police, that their son had not yet woken up. So when Patsy told CNN that she had screamed for John from outside of JonBenet's second-floor room, Barb realized that something didn't seem right.
Like he would have heard that? I mean, I feel like that would have woken anybody up. Kids, babies, toddlers, adults. I feel like that if you were screaming like that, basically outside his door too, pretty sure everybody would hear that.
While Burke sleeping in after a relatively late night was certainly a possibility, it struck her as very unlikely that he would not wake up if he heard his mother screaming from the other side of the same floor. Right? Especially if John could hear her from his third-floor bedroom. It was a good question, and one that would come up again and again throughout the following months of the investigation. The following day, the detective team got to work in earnest, and for detectives Thomas and Trujillo, the first stop was Peachtree Presbyterian Church. It was where John and Patsy tied the knot on November 5th, 1980. It was where they buried John's eldest daughter, Beth, in 1992. And as of December 31st, 1996, it also became the final resting place of JonBenet Ramsey. And on the morning of January 2nd, 1997, detectives Thomas and Trujillo were there to speak with the man who had been there for all of it, the Reverend Dr. Frank Harrington. If anyone knew the souls of these people, it would be the man responsible for them. But Reverend Harrington wasn't forthcoming. "I'm not sure I want to talk with you," the minister told the detectives. And then, unprompted, he told them he would share no privileged information. Now, Thomas knew what he meant, that much like doctors and lawyers, most information shared in confidence with a member of the clergy can, with some exceptions, be legally withheld from the police. But it was still an interesting statement, considering that they hadn't actually asked yet. And that prompted Thomas.
Oh, like, it's like showing up and being like, "Hey, how's it going?" And he was like, "I'm not going to talk to you." It's like, well, we haven't even asked anything yet.
Statement, considering that they hadn't actually asked yet.
Yeah.
And that prompted Thomas to ask the obvious question: is there privileged information? Harrington said that he wouldn't answer that either, and then asked if he'd need an attorney. And though Thomas and Trujillo assured him that he was not a suspect, the Reverend decided that he would feel more comfortable with a lawyer and a witness present, so any inquiries would have to wait until after those two roles were filled. 10 minutes later they were, and the questions could begin. But unfortunately, the brief exchange yielded little information. Though Harrington was by no means legally obligated to tell them anything, it did bother the detectives that a man of God would reach for a lawyer rather than voluntarily give police everything he could to solve the terrible murder of a child, particularly if he wasn't violating the sanctity of confession.
True. I think there's definitely some instances like where they won't say anything, but I mean, if this could help you solve a murder of a child, like, why wouldn't you tell them? Like, why wouldn't you be forthcoming and helpful? That is kind of weird.
The terrible murder of a child, particularly if he wasn't violating the sanctity of confession. The next stop on the itinerary was the funeral home, where Thomas and Trujillo learned that there were no suspicious visitors during the viewing. No one seemed out of place. It was just hundreds of people paying their respects to a dead child. But the investigators were most interested in the Ramseys' behavior, specifically if they had been curious about how their daughter's injuries had been hidden. According to the assistant director, they never asked. One of the more revealing interviews came with a visit to the home of Don and Nedra Paw, Patsy's elderly mother and father. And according to Detective Thomas, Nedra seemed obsessed with pageants. One room in the Paw home, he said, was a shrine to beauty pageants, filled with pictures and articles and with trophies and crowns worn by Patsy and Pam. And though the detectives were trying to keep the conversation on the topic of JonBenet, Nedra kept driving the conversation back towards pageantry. She told us that JonBenet had started on the runways at the age of 4 for exactly the same reason children begin training for the Olympics at an early age, writes Thomas. Nedra's reason being that if you don't start them young, they fall miserably behind. They were eventually able to get her off the topic, and from that point on, Nedra was generally very open. She agreed.
That is kind of weird, though. That I mean, I get that is your passion, and that was your passion in life, either for, maybe for yourself and for your daughters. But I mean, this is not the time nor the place for that kind of discussion.
They were eventually able to get her off the topic, and from that point on, Nedra was generally very open. She agreed with the majority of Ramsey associates that no stranger could have navigated that maze of a house, going so far as to say that you couldn't find the basement in that house if you didn't know where it was. You know it was down, but which door would you go through to find it? There's a lot of doors that look like a basement door in that house. For the investigators, this was yet another point against the perpetrator being a stranger.
Right.
Everyone seemed to be on the same page that the killer must have been familiar with the home's layout. One spot where they did run into some trouble was the issue of JonBenet's bedwetting habit. Nedra was chatty about almost everything else, but became evasive about that particular topic. And
Is that because she knew something was going on? Because I feel like when kids are wetting the bed past a certain age, like past the bedwetting phase, it's usually because of some sort of trauma that happens. Usually, the really, really bad stuff.
the detectives made a mental note to follow up on that. Regarding John's decision to hire his own legal and investigative team, she told Thomas and Trujillo, "It's not that you folks in Boulder aren't doing a good job and can't resolve this, but it's my understanding that there's never been a kidnapping in Boulder. So, if you've never been on a kidnapping before, you need great minds who have done this before." And she wasn't incorrect about the lack of experience within the Boulder PD. They had no dedicated homicide detectives, and they were inexperienced with kidnappings of this kind. But that didn't mean they were bad detectives. Thomas showed...
Also true. And I mean, you did have at least some help of seasoned people in here.
just that when he asked Nedra what JonBenet would do if awakened suddenly. Nedra explained that she didn't like being pulled out of bed, and that she would scream bloody murder if she was. The grandmother then followed that up with the remark that unless they chloroformed her or taped her mouth, she would have screamed like you wouldn't believe.
I mean, that is very telling information too. That is very telling information. Like this person knows this family and knows JonBenet very well, like really well, like almost like a parent.
Unless they chloroformed
Just saying. I'm just saying so far.
her or taped her mouth, she would have screamed like you wouldn't believe. There certainly wasn't chloroform found at the scene or in JonBenet's system or on JonBenet at all, but there had been tape. So it was now a question of when that tape had been applied. When the conversation steered to the topic of potential suspects, and in particular the initials SBTC from the ransom note, Nedra was quick to offer up that son of a bitch Tom Carson. In 1997, Carson was the chief financial officer at Access Graphics, and apparently he'd been responsible for getting Nedra fired from a position she too held at John's company. As had John and Patsy Ramsey, she also suggested that Jeff Merrick and Linda Hoffman-Pugh could be responsible, as well as a handyman, a painter, the gardener, the nanny, and a couple of neighborhood kids. And then...
based off of what?
Somewhat unexpectedly, really very unexpectedly, she named Fleet and Priscilla White, a couple who had been amongst the very first people called on the morning that JonBenet was reported missing, just minutes after Patsy called the police. They'd stuck by the Ramseys that entire day, Burke had spent most of that morning and afternoon at their house, and Fleet White had even been with John when the man found his daughter's lifeless body in that dark windowless room. So why on earth would they point the finger at him? The answer lay with an incident that transpired shortly after JonBenet's funeral on New Year's Eve. As the Paws and others would explain over the course of the detectives' time in Atlanta, the Whites were not particularly pleased with how John and Patsy were handling the investigation. The couple had been staying with John's brother Jeff, and at some point he overheard them discussing a plan to speak with John and Patsy about their lack of cooperation with the authorities. Jeff gave his brother a heads up, and for some reason all hell broke loose. From what the detectives were able to gather, emotions were running high, and some of the Ramsey Paw clan grew afraid, and one of Patsy's sisters thought the Whites were coming to kill them all. It was unclear how
I don't think that. Okay. That seems a little bit dramatic. I think they have every right to be critical of the way that they've been behaving through this. I think that that's very fair criticism. Um, that doesn't mean that they're gonna be out to get you. That seems a little bit over the top. But I don't know. I mean, like that doesn't. It's as far as the whites go. I don't blame them. You know, like they are acting weird. They are being weird, and they are not being very cooperative. As far as you know, if you really want to figure out who killed your child, they're doing anything but being helpful.
Afraid, and one of Patsy's sisters thought the whites were coming to kill them all. It was unclear how they came to that conclusion, as there was no evidence that the whites had even been angry prior to arriving at the Paw residence. Despite that, Don Paw even ended up loading not one, but two pistols and placing them underneath a couch cushion. Thankfully, John Ramsey was able to eventually calm everyone down by saying that Fleet was his friend and would not harm anyone. Family friend and financial advisor Ron Westmoreland tried to help de-escalate the situation and asked Don Paul to put the guns away, but it's unclear if he actually did. Don said that he had, but Nedra thought that he hadn't. When the whites did arrive, the extended Ramsey family characterized him as waving his big hands about, speaking excitedly, and following Ramsey around the room in what they considered to be a confrontational manner. Fleet expressed that he and other friends of the family were chagrined that he seemed to be avoiding the cops. He felt as though John's attorneys were giving them bad advice, and that their reluctance to speak with police was only causing the public to view them with suspicion.
That's okay. This guy is a good friend. You know, as much as I don't really had I didn't really have much opinions on the other couples that had shown up, but like this guy and his wife, they really don't seem like they are bad. I mean, like they seem like they are actually like being a true friend, which probably tells you more about the Ramseys and everybody else than it does about them, you know?
Advice, and that their reluctance to speak with police was only causing the public to view them with suspicion. The whites would ultimately choose to book their own flight home instead of taking the Ramseys' plane, and the police planned to get their side of the story when they got back to Boulder. When the investigators wrapped up their conversation with the Paws, they left the house to a sea of reporters. Thomas gave one brief statement that they were in Atlanta merely as part of conducting a full investigation, not to serve warrants or make arrests. But the reporters were unconvinced. Now, while it's unclear exactly what day this interview occurred, Thomas and Trujillo also paid a visit to the Marietta, Georgia home of John Ramsey's ex-wife, Lucinda Johnson, mother of John's eldest three children, Melissa, John Andrew, and the late Beth Ramsey. She, too, requested the presence of a witness prior to speaking with detectives, and she still wasn't particularly cooperative once that person arrived. She did tell them that she and John had married on July 16, 1966 in Kalamazoo, Michigan. She'd been with him through his time in the Navy, the beginning of his business career, and the birth of their three children, but all of that came crashing down when she discovered that John was having an affair during the 1970s. They separated for a time, and then divorced on February 24, 1978. Lucinda was awarded physical custody, while John received generous visitation rights. He also paid $800 per month in child support and alimony, as well as college expenses for all three children. They split the estate down the middle and went their separate ways, only for John's father to marry Lucinda's mother several years later. And partially as a result, Lucinda remained a part of the Ramsey family in a greater way than an ex-wife typically would.
Oh my God, that is weird. Can you imagine that? I could not imagine. Oh my God. That is a little bit wild.
And even worked with Patsy to guide Beth through Atlanta's debutante scene. It was an odd arrangement, but it seemed to work for them, with Lucinda even visiting the Ramsey family's Boulder home. Still, despite the ostensibly amicable split, the fact that the marriage had ended over an affair was certainly relevant information.
I can't believe this. This is crazy. This is wild.
Split, the fact that the marriage had ended over an affair was certainly relevant information. A jilted ex-lover, be it the wife or the other woman, could be considered a person with a motive to harm John or his family. Naturally, the investigators wanted to know who she was. I don't recall her name, came the rather surprising reply, and Thomas struggled to understand how any scorned ex-wife could ever forget the name of the other woman who broke up her marriage.
True. You could ask somebody, you know, like this could have happened 20 years ago, and, you know, those women will know. They will know.
So the detectives got the feeling that she may know more than she was letting on, and that perhaps there was room for a bit of future bargaining considering the fact that John, Andrew, and Melissa had not yet been cleared by police. And though they would never have withheld such a finding, they might be able to leverage Lucinda's desire to see her children cleared of suspicion into getting the information they wanted regarding John's former mistress. The detectives also spent some time canvassing the neighborhood around Northridge Drive, where John and Patsy had lived before their move to Colorado. For the most part, nothing came of it, but a visit to a woman by the name of Vesta Taylor, who lived across the street from the Ramseys for a decade, revealed an interesting lead. While living in Atlanta, Patsy and John were part of a group who called themselves the Lunch Bunch, and these were 10 couples who Thomas understood were among John and Patsy's oldest friends. These were doctors, lawyers, accountants, and other such members of Atlanta's professional class. And detectives hoped that they could be the key to understanding who might be responsible for the ever more confusing murder of JonBenet Ramsey. It would unfortunately take several months to interview all of them, and at this point, the detectives had to get back to Colorado. It seemed their ship had sprung a leak. But who was responsible for those leaks and the fallout of attempting to identify that person is a story for the next episode of this series.
Oh my
This
God.
case is by far the most convoluted thing I've ever looked into, and we're still only like 9 days into the investigation as it happened.
That's so crazy to think about that. Like, we're on the 4th video and we're only 9 days in, and look at everything that has happened. Like, everything that could go wrong went wrong. And literally, this is just, for lack of a better word, this is the whole shitstorm.
There's going to be more interviews to look at. There's going to be a whole bunch of conflict between the DA's office and the Boulder PD. There's Ramsey family attorneys trying to do things that they have zero power to do.
Yeah.
There are police tripping over each other trying to figure out who the leaker is. And it's going to be a while, to be honest. We're going to have a lot of episodes on this series. I can't tell you exactly what will be in the next one because, to be perfectly honest, as my videographer and producer and best friend here knows, I have yet to have a video go over the stuff I expected to go over. I expected the first video to take us through, at the very least, the end of December, and it took us 3 videos to get through 5 days. So for those of you still sticking with,
I think that just shows like how terrible and how atrocious this, like, everything was, and how people are behaving, how people are acting, what people are saying. I think it just goes to show like how messy this ended up really, really actually being.
December, and it took us 3 videos to get through 5 days. So for those of you still sticking with us here, I genuinely appreciate it so very much.
I appreciate you, sir, because you have, these deep dives into this and everything that you've been going through. You got me hooked. I am sucked in. I am locked in. I look forward to this every week. This is such, I feel like this is like an anomaly of a case, honestly, because I have never seen so many things go so wrong, and so many things get overlooked, and there's no consequences for anybody anywhere at all at any point in time for one, just like not even doing their job correctly, and 2, the way that just trying to get these interviews with the Ramseys is like pulling teeth. Like, it's all weird. It's all weird.
So for those of you still sticking with us here, I genuinely appreciate it so very much. And I hope that we are able to shed light on some of the reason that this case is still a mystery almost 3 decades later, and why nobody's ever been arrested, and why there are two very entrenched camps on this, that there is the intruder did it and the Ramseys did it. Why after all this time? If there aren't many cases that are this strange.
I would just say, I'm definitely in it's someone in the family or close to the family team. I'm on that side. I think there's too much internal intel that would make me believe this would be something external. But as far as like, do I think it was the parents? I don't know yet. They look really, really bad. They look really bad. But I am interested to when we get to start talking about Burke.
So, if you're still sticking with us through this, I appreciate it, and I hope you will follow through on the rest of the series, because we can really only continue
Absolutely,
doing
we
the
will.
series if people continue watching it. So, those views, those shares, if you like the video, all of those things, if you hit the notification bell and subscribe to the channel, obviously, those all help us to continue doing this work.
Okay, well, this was another mess. As I don't even know what else to say about it. This was a mess. This was an absolute mess. I am very interested into knowing why the Ramseys decided that it was a good idea to go on television on CNN. I mean, you know, to have this interview, but are so unwilling to have an interview with law enforcement. That like blows my mind. I feel like that is so crazy because I mean, usually it's the other way around, right? So like you have your interview with law enforcement and then, you know, then usually people go talk to the press. That's usually the order of it. Um I really don't understand like why they are being so difficult if they really truly want to know what happened to this little girl, to what happened to their daughter. You know, I don't know why they are being so difficult and just acting weird, saying weird stuff, getting mad at their friends who I think have their best interest in mind. The whites, like having the whites come in and being like, you know, y'all gotta like get your shit together and you gotta talk to the police. Like I mean, if you really want to know what happened to her, you gotta talk to the police. And then they like crash out over it. That just seems weird. Like I feel like there's so many things about what we've seen up until this point, it makes them look bad. Like it just makes them look bad. And like he said, the interview, stinky, smelly. Absolutely. I 100% agree with him. I don't know. I this is a whole mess. I mean, I don't know. I feel like like part of me feels like it definitely could be the parents, but then the other part of me is I want to get to where he talks about Burke because I know that there's a lot of people think that Burke did it too. So I am very very interested in when we get to that segment. But this is a great video. He's doing a fantastic job. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I appreciate you guys being here. Be sure to go and like and subscribe to the Lore Lodge. He is doing just a phenomenal job with this series. So if you are enjoying this, watching this with me, please go and subscribe to him because he is just, I mean, him and his team are just, they're doing a fantastic job. But that's going to do it for me. I hope you guys had a great day and I will see you in the next one.